Yamaha MT10 with a beautiful new Nitron shock with the remote preload adjuster, looking very nice indeed. I've been promising myself for quite a few years that I would upgrade the suspension on this bike. Finally got round to it, and ironically, because of the pandemic, I can't test ride it. Never mind, at least I can sit in my garden and look at it. So I'm not going to do I haven't done a walkthrough of this. There's no point, because there is already an excellent walkthrough. You want to head over to Sport Bike Track Gear, Brian Van, and he does a great walkthrough of how to fit a rear shock to a Yamaha R1, which is 95% the same as the MT10. I just thought I would briefly show you the tools I used, just so that you've got an idea of what you're going to need, and just a couple of pointers for how to do this on the MT10. Oh, there's a Honda looking sexy. Hello, beautiful. So there's the old shock, using that as a paperweight. That's what it's good for. So here's what you're going to need tools wise. You're going to want to take off the rear wheel. Hopefully that's obvious, for which you need a 32mm socket. And when you're putting it back on, you're going to need a big old torque wrench. If you're not sure what the torque settings are, check in the user manual. A bit of a debate online about the torque setting for the rear wheel, because it's very high in the manual. Decide for yourself what you want to do. Smaller torque wrench for doing up the bolts on the shock and the linkages. Oh, a bit of a fine wet and dry for scrubbing off the corrosion on the bolts, of which you'll definitely be finding some, I promise you that. You're going to need some Loctite when you do them back up again. Oh yeah, so you are going to need for sure an extension bar set over and above whatever you've got in your socket set. Pair of pliers, and if, like me, you are constantly dropping bolts into the depths of the bike, you're going to want a magnetic pickup. Absolute lifesaver. Page of the workshop manual showing you where all the bolts go with the torque settings, and a bit of paper. I just numbered these corresponding to the manual, so when you take out the bolts, just put them on here, line them up, and that way you'll know which one is which. There's quite a few bolts come out, so it's very easy to get confused. What else we got? A bit 2x4, fits perfectly underneath the rear tyre. Makes your life a lot easier when you're trying to take out the rear wheel. Some brake cleaner, clean up the bits and pieces, don't get it in the bearings obviously. And you're going to need a decent socket set, because on some occasions you're going to need two of the same socket. I think I needed two different 17mm at the same time, possibly others as well. What else are you going to need? You're going to need an ABBA stand, or some other means of suspending the bike. Obviously you can't use the paddock stand to suspend the bike, because once you take the shock out there's nothing holding the bike up. But if you have a paddock stand as well, that is very useful for raising and lowering the swing arm when you're trying to manipulate the shock in and out. And if you pop over and watch that video on Sport Bike Track Gear, you'll see exactly what that looks like. So first thing to do is just to crack the various nuts. You can get to them all with the extender bars. The service manual says that you have to take off the tank to do this job. That's definitely not true. You can get into that nut there, even though the cables won't move because they're right under the tank. You can still get into that nut, so there's really no need to take off the tank. Take this off, take the pegs off, because you're going to need the space in there to do all the bolts and stuff. If you're going with the remote preload adjuster, obviously you've got to take this off as well. What else can I tell you? Taking the old shock out was pretty tricky actually. Manoeuvring out the old shock, trying to get it past the linkage and just get it all wiggled out was quite difficult, just because there's not much space to work with. Funnily enough, getting the new one back in was much easier. Just take your time, think about it logically, think about the order in which you're doing up the bolts, because obviously this one here, the lower shock mount, you can neither untighten nor tighten this whilst the dog legs are in the way. So dog legs, dog bone. So there's an order in which you have to do it. Other than that, take it slow and you should be good. Well, I say that, I haven't actually taken it out for a ride yet. It might just collapse the first time I use it, who knows. To be absolutely honest with you, the biggest pain in the arse of doing this job is trying to fit the rear wheel back in, because if you've done it before, you know it's a bit of a juggling match with the wheel and the chain and the carrier for the caliper. So I'll tell you a little tip. First thing, before you take the wheel off, take off the ABS sensor, because it's very easy to damage it. Just be very careful that you recognise which way to put it back on, because there's a couple of parts to it and it is easy to put it in the wrong way around. When you've done it right, the sensor which is, come on, focus, sensor which is there, is that right? Yeah, here's there it is. It's really quite close to the disc, the little rotor thing, and that's correct. If you fitted it wrong, there'll be a bigger gap there. So yeah, the biggest problem is trying to get the wheel back in. And a little tip that I found useful: before you try and put the wheel back in, just fit the caliper carrier into the groove at the back there and cable tie it in, and then put the wheel on and put the spindle through nearly all the way, cut the cable tie off, put it all the way through, and yeah, the cable tie just makes your life much easier. Oh, there's something else you need. You need some mats if you're a certain side of 40 years old. So there you go. I hope that's of help to somebody, and when I eventually get to ride this thing on the road, maybe I'll post another video up and let you know whether it was worth the upgrade.